So you had a question?
Yeah, so my question is, and I'm gonna ask an impossible question, but one I hope will still interesting conversation. How do you ask questions that clarify the details without getting too far ahead of them? So in a way that, I guess, doesn't lead the witness, doesn't ask the question before it's merited, right? Like, for example, I'm thinking of Alyssa's last interview where we were talking last time after hers about I had jumped in to rescue her, offered her possibilities, right, of what that is. And I think my understanding is the difference there is I was out ahead of her in terms of the phenomena. She had just said something like my question was how was the pain present or the uncomfortableness, and I'd said, well, is this physically or whatever, right? Like I gave her options without her ever saying anything more beyond that. Versus for Gabriel today on his 6 beat, when he was saying, I'm seeing this scene, then you could ask details about what is it that he sees and flush it out from that way. And I guess, but the question is, I feel like there's a difference between those two different scenarios. And I want to try to understand.
Well, I'm not sure that I can remember clearly enough about what happened in Alyssa's, so let me see whether I can answer your question about by referring to what happened just now, or I've got a better memory about it. Where I thought you were going down the wrong track was that you were asking him to compare this scene to that scene. You were asking whether it was the same thing. I think it would be better to go back and watch it again to see exactly what he said, because I don't have a vertical memory, but that's what I recall that you asking something like, well, how is this?
Are you talking about the earlier beat, like the two chess beats, or this one?
Six,
Okay.
the last beat. And my reaction to that was, you can't ask that question before you know what the phenomenon is. We got to nail down the phenomenon of the visual image, and we got to nail down the phenomenon of the whispering loud separately. And then we can ask how those things are different. The reaction that I had was that Cody's question was a meta question before we had the phenomenon nailed down. And that's where I think was the mistake. You can't ask a meta question until you got the phenomenon nailed down.
And the meta question being?
I don't think I can recall.
Because I don't even know if there is a specific question, but from what I'm taking from what you're saying is, I didn't clarify what he was seeing. And I wanted to try to ask, what I was trying to ask was, this apparent hearing of his real world speech, was that part of the inner scene? Was that part of the scene that he was seeing again, basically? Was that, were those things basically cohesive, right? Like, and so,
that's the question that I was disturbed about. And the reason that I was disturbed about it was that that we weren't adequately concrete about the scene, the imaginary scene, before, and separately, we weren't adequately clear about anything, actually. And then we were asked, well, are these things together? So we weren't adequately clear about A, and we weren't adequately clear about E, but the question about B, and the question was about, well, was A part of B? And that, I think, is going to get you into trouble, because as long as he's ambiguous about A and or B, and then you ask, well, it was part of B, then he can answer that question in a metaphorical, ambiguated, I guess it's just ambiguous way. But if you've pinned him down to and by pin him down, that's too strong, but if it's been clear to him that I want us to be disambiguated about what it is that we're going here, and so I was asking, you know, what's your point of view, and what's the lighting like, and all that stuff,
Mhm.
all that stuff makes that scene real is too strong, but it makes that scene differentiated on its own, I guess, is probably good. And then when you ask, which I probably was asking more or less exactly the same question that you were asking, but I was asking it later, which was the difference. So the question was, well, how did the real world whispering connect to that? Then you could say, well, I didn't pay any attention to that at all. But what is of fundamental importance is getting to the phenomenon. And the phenomenon is not a comparison.
Mhm.
The phenomenon is, well, this was happening, I was seeing Kylie as a lump. That's the phenomenon.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that, like, he had described to us this inner scene, and then, I don't know, with that question, he said, well, then there was the bluish gray, it was blurry, then she was the lump, like, all these other details started coming out, which I thought was interesting, because and he said there was not a lot of lighting, it was dim, there were all of those kinds of things. Like, not that that's, I mean, but it helps to paint the picture of the experience, like.
That's the disambiguation.
Yeah,
So,
interesting.
so he had that knowledge that, but not at his fingertips. If he had had it at his fingertips, he would have told us about it in the
Said it
first
right
place.
away. Yep. Interesting.
It was even unclear to me that he was talking about, he had said, I'm imagining this thing, and he had said image. I wasn't about to
Yeah.
take the bait that it was
Yeah.
innerly seen, but I was
Yeah.
also surprised that it was I mean, this was very much an inner scene, but that's not how it first started out. But
To me, his use of the word imagine, again with the words, but I thought it was interesting that he was saying that on day one. You don't really, I feel like, to say things like that, because he was having these clear distinctions between, he was pretty clear about what was going on in reality and what wasn't going on in reality. I don't know, I felt for a first day, I thought that was kind of interesting. Like, he was like, well, like, in reality, and I was like, interesting. I don't know. Maybe
So
I haven't seen that before.
what I would say about that is I wouldn't be too confident about it. It is
Yeah,
a first day.
yeah.
It is a first day for him. What he was careful about making distinctions.
Yeah.
But
Whether those
which
stick
is
around.
good. But whether those distinctions were made at the moment of the beep is
Yeah.
another deal altogether.
I agree. I thought it was just kind of interesting.
And you know, this is a very complicated
Yeah.
situation because he's telling about his inner experience, and
Mhm.
then there's his relationship with you and his relationship with me, and that he's trying to impress me or trying to impress you or whatever it is that he's trying to do.
Yeah,
And,
true.
And has an interest in consciousness studies, whatever that is, and whatever his interests are in that regard.
Did you have the meeting with him already?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that had taken place.
So, you know, it's a social, interpersonal situation.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about Beat 4. I just thought about that. Do you think that that's a lost experience or that's a nothing experience? I mean, obviously we can't make any assumptions, but I was just wondering what your take is on that.
My take on that is that I don't know anything about it.
Okay.
I elected to take a pass on it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't, and I'm not in that kind of a situation, and I'm not exactly sure why. I'm guessing there would have been something fruitful to have been gained by a conversation about why he skipped that beat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that was, but I suspect that there was something interesting about that. I elected not to go there, I think because it was 20 to 5 or whatever, we
Yeah.
had 5 minutes left. Whether it was gonna be more useful to talk about that, or to have have a conversation about another
Also
beat.
day one.
And I elected to go without talking about that.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that that wouldn't have been important. It would've- And if it happened on a day two, that would be a different deal for me.
Yeah, I agree, if it happened later on in the. Because I thought it was interesting that when he had said, he had made the comment about the beep being on for a long time and how he feels he loses the experience, yet he, I mean, again, I don't know if these things were all apprehended at the moment of the beep exactly, but he had all of these things going on. I was expecting for him to have a lot more I don't knows if that was the case. And then I just found it interesting that it was that one instance where it was, well, I lost it at that one beep. But everything else, it seemed like.
So
there was
let me
something.
tell you what my take on that was. He was saying, he was saying that the beep would last for a long time, it would be better, or whatever. My translation of that was, I'm worried I didn't do a good job. Doesn't have anything to
Okay.
do with the length of the beep.
I see,
It has to do with the interpersonal situation here.
I see.
and-
Okay.
And whatever, so I didn't take that literally. I responded as if I was taking it literally,
I see.
but my response was not really about the beep. My response was taking him seriously. I was, you know, it's sort of like a dance. You're trying to figure out how close we're gonna dance together, right?
Yeah.
And he takes this gesture, and then I make a gesture back, and we're negotiating with each other in a way about how we're gonna interact with each other. And he starts out by talking about the beep, and I said, oh, I'm gonna talk about the beep, and this is,
So is it, I mean, to write that down, is that useful?
probably not.
Okay. I, yeah.
But the point that I'm trying to make here is, it's
Yeah.
all iterative,
Mhm.
aimed at day two. That conversation, from my point of view, was aimed at day two.
Yeah.
The beep didn't matter to me. I could have given him a long discussion about why the beep was as long and short or whatever. It's my patent actually is about the length of the beep. But my motivation in that conversation, part of the conversation, was the same as the motivation of
Mhm.
I want us to learn to take each other seriously,
Mhm.
so that tomorrow we can do a better job than today.
Mhm.
And every word of that conversation was about that,
Mhm.
or is about that. No, the whole conversation is always about that, from my point of view.
Mhm.
And that even includes the disambiguation. I want to disambiguate today, not so much to get at the experience of today, but because I want him to know that I want to know what those details are. Because I do think what I said was true. It's not like I'm trying to manipulate it by saying false things. In any kind of a conversation, you got a choice of 100 things that you could say.
Mhm.
And what I want him to get out of this is that I'm paying attention to the details here. I want to know the details. I'm taking the details seriously, and I'm taking what he says about those details seriously.
Mhm.
Aimed at tomorrow.
Okay.
But from the interviewer standpoint, my takeaway from this is, I mean, really, it kind of boils down to simply to get to the phenomena. Disambiguate as much wherever possible. Right?
Mhm.
If he's seeing something, tell me what you're seeing.
Mhm.
The method is totally simple get to the phenomenon. Obviously, it's difficult in practice and complicated in practice, but it's always,
Yeah.
it's just different levels of that. Yeah, constantly turning the screw into those levels to get better at it, get better at it, get better at it. How much of the phenomenon do I have yet? What part of the phenomenon do I think I can get if I ask some more questions? I don't want to scare them off because I'm
Mhm.
more interested in tomorrow, but all those things, the social,
Yeah.
the social part of it. But you're absolutely right. What's the phenomenon? it's as simple, the whole DS thing is as simple as it could possibly be. And as complicated as it could possibly be.
Mhm.